Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the Supremely Enlightened One. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the Supremely Enlightened One. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the Supremely Enlightened One. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Namo Buddhaya. So today I wanted to continue with the theme that we began 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago we did the Nakula Pitu Sutta.
Nakula Pitu Sutta, Samyutta Nikaya. Right, correct.
So in that discourse we learned about how a person becomes sick in body but doesn't become sick mentally, right? So specifically with the state of the world these days, the pandemic. So I thought that was a very useful sutta for everyone to learn because it discusses this is the fact of our lives, right? That we are subject to illness, that we can contract the virus, we can contract COVID-19, right? So even if we've received vaccines, it's possible for breakthrough infection to occur, right? And the virus is mutating, so it's possible to become sick in the future. But in that discourse, the Buddha speaks about how, even if the body becomes sick, how to not become sick mentally. And maybe some of you remember, in that discourse, the Buddha specifically discussed the view of a self. So holding a view of a self in relation to the 5 aggregates affected by clinging is a mental illness, the Buddha teaches. So because of that, we suffer. Without that view of a self, even the body becomes sick, but we don't suffer mentally because of that. So continuing with that theme, so that discourse was about oneself, right? But today I wanted to teach 2 discourses, one a bit longer and another a short discourse about other people. So other people can also become sick, right? So I looked at the numbers recently and I saw almost, it was about 200,050 deaths in the past 4 weeks. And how many, I don't remember exactly how many millions of people contracted the virus. So the point is that so we should investigate the Dhamma in terms of ourselves and others. Maybe you remember in the establishments of mindfulness too, contemplating the body, feelings, mind, and Dhammas in relation to oneself and others. So it's important to do both, because then we begin to understand more and more the nature of this life, and not only the nature of our own life, but the nature of others' lives too. So not only we are subject to aging, all beings are subject to aging. Not only we are subject to sickness, all beings are subject to sickness. Not only we are subject to death, all beings will eventually die, right? So this is the nature. So today, I wanted to begin with, it's called the Piyajatika Sutta. It's Majjhima Nikaya number 87, if someone can send a link to that. And the discourse means, Piyajatika means, born from those who are dear. So especially in this time now, I said about 250,000 people died in the past 4 weeks because of COVID-19. So all of those people, right, are someone's relatives, right? If a man dies, he's someone's son, maybe someone's father, someone's brother, someone's husband, right? If a woman dies, she's someone's daughter, probably someone's mother, someone's sister maybe, and someone's wife. So with so many people dying, the result is many grieving relatives, right? A lot of people suffering because of their relatives' death. So in relation to that, this is a very important discourse so we can understand the nature of this suffering according to the Dhamma. Now let me first ask everyone, does everyone remember the first noble truth? Maybe some of you have memorized it. It's good to memorize it if you can. It's very important. Can anyone tell me the first noble truth?
The noble truth of suffering, Bante.
Yes, the noble truth of suffering. Now, included in the noble truth of suffering, the Buddha says, Piyehi vipayogo dukkho. So, to be separated from what is pleasing is suffering. And that can be forms, sounds, smells, tastes, touches. And it can also include people, right? People and objects. So to be separated from one's loved ones is the part of the noble truth of suffering. But normally, so if a person doesn't know the Dhamma taught by the Buddha, doesn't understand the Dhamma, now normally people can think, right, because my son, my daughter, my father, mother, sister, spouse died, I'm suffering. Because of their death, I am suffering. That's normally how people think, right? But is that the reality? Is that true? What do you think? Do they suffer because their relatives died?
Bhante, I think it's because of the separation and not that it's the separation from the clinging to that person or the relationship that you suffer.
Close. Yeah, part of what you said is correct. So the separation from one's relatives, one's dearly beloved relatives, that is the suffering. But the cause of the suffering is the craving, right? Buddha taught in the Noble Truth of the Origin of Suffering. So for an Arahant, right, for the Buddha, his relatives died. The Sakyans were massacred during the time of the Buddha. But did the Buddha suffer because of that? No, right? Why? Because he didn't have attachment, desire, craving. So we should understand this very clearly because it's so understanding this is gaining a realization of the Dhamma, right? Is realizing the Four Noble Truths. So we should understand that separation from one's loved ones, that is the suffering. But the cause of suffering is something else. That's an internal thing, actually, right? So the cause of suffering is an internal thing. It's not because of external circumstances, right? Do you understand that? Okay,
Yes,
so
Bante.
continuing with that, let's begin the discourse now. Now, anyone who joined later, maybe we're on Majjhima Nikaya, number 87, Piyajatika Sutta. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. Now on that occasion, a certain householder's dear and beloved only son had died. After his son's death, he had no more desire to work or to eat. He kept going to the charnel ground and crying, "My only son, where are you? My only son, where are you?" So he's mourning his son's death. He's grieving his son's death, right? And he doesn't understand the reality that his son is passed away, right? He's going to the charnel ground and looking for his son. Then that householder went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, sat down at one side. The Blessed One said to him, "Householder, your faculties are not those of one in control of his own mind. Your faculties are deranged." So he's gone mad to some degree, this man, because his son died. "How could my faculties not be deranged, Venerable Sir? For my dear and beloved only son has died. Since he died, I have no more desire to work or to eat. I keep going to the charnel ground and crying, 'My only son, where are you? My only son, where are you?' So it is, householder, so it is." Buddha says, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear. Now, what does the householder say to this? Venerable Sir, who would ever think that sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish, we can say in short, suffering, are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear? Venerable Sir, happiness and joy are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear. So he disagrees with the Buddha's words. Then, displeased with the Blessed One's words, disapproving of them, the householder rose from his seat and left. Now, let's look at this. What the householder said, happiness and joy are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear. Is that true or false? What do you think?
It's true, Bhante.
Now, what do you think about the Buddha's words? Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish are born from those who are dear. Is that true or false?
That's very true as well.
That is also true.
That's also true, right? So, have you learned about there's 3 words, gratification, danger, and escape? Have you learned about those in the Dhamma? So we can think in terms of the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. So there's a gratification in them. That means they give rise to happiness and joy, pleasure and happiness. But there's also a danger, or you could say like a drawback, the pros and cons. So what is the danger? It's that they're impermanent. Suffering, they're suffering because they're impermanent and subject to change. And the escape from them is to remove one's desire and attachment for the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. So if there were no gratification, then people wouldn't get attached to them, right? Because there's a gratification, because they give rise to happiness and not solely suffering, people get attached to them. But because there's also a danger, a drawback, then people become disenchanted with them. So it's possible to become disenchanted with them because there is a danger, a drawback. So arahants have become disenchanted entirely with the five aggregates affected by clinging, with suffering, so to speak. So actually, if we investigate the Noble Truths, the Four Noble Truths deeply, we are actually attached to suffering. We actually desire suffering, but we don't see that properly because of ignorance. So to have desire towards something that's impermanent is desiring something that's a source of suffering, actually, if we investigate it deeply. And then the escape, we can escape from things of the world by removing our desire and attachment for them. So because that possibility is there, people escape from the world. Arahants escape from the world. The Buddha escaped from the world. So the Buddha's words and the words of the householder, they're both true. But the Buddha's pointing to something different than what the householder's pointing towards, right? So the Buddha is speaking about the noble truth of suffering, but the householder's words aren't related to that. Now, on that occasion, some gamblers were playing with dice not far from the Blessed One. Look at what happens now. Then the householder went to those gamblers and said, "Just now, sirs, I went to the recluse Gautama, and after paying homage to him, I sat down at one side. When I had done so, the recluse Gautama said to me, 'Householder, your faculties are not those of one in control of his own mind.'" And then the entire conversation is repeated, what the Buddha said about the arising of suffering, arising from those who are dear. And then the householder's words, where he disagreed with the Buddha and said that happiness and joy are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear. Then, displeased with the recluse Gautama's words, disapproving of them, I rose from my seat and left. So he's telling all this to the gamblers, repeating everything that happened. So the gamblers say, "So it is, householder, so it is. Happiness and joy are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear." Then the householder left thinking, I agree with the gamblers. So he meets the Buddha, right? The fully enlightened teacher in the world. He disagrees with the Buddha and he agrees with what the gamblers said. Why? Because they agree with his opinion, right? So this happens to us. I think this happens to a lot of Western people when they begin to learn the Dhamma. So they encounter things in the Buddha's teaching that they don't agree with right away, that don't match with their views. And because of that, instead of accepting them out of faith in the Buddha, that's why faith is so important. So even though Buddhism is extremely rationalistic, without, it doesn't have the dogmas that theism has, but even so, faith is of utmost importance in Buddhism. Otherwise, we don't have the opportunity to really practice what the Buddha teaches. So the Buddha says to do something, and if we don't have faith in the Buddha, are we going to do it? No, right? So faith is extremely important. With that faith, we gain the opportunity to accept what the Buddha teaches. Otherwise, so as Buddhism is taught in Western countries, sometimes people simply just pick and choose what they like in the Buddha's teachings, and then you practice that or teach that. But so they can do that if they want, but you shouldn't do that in the name of Buddhism, because what they're actually learning, teaching is something else that just agrees with their preconceived notions that they already have. Right? So instead of doing that, it's important to be humble, have faith in the Buddha, and we begin by going for refuge in the Triple Gem. That's the first step, right, in becoming a Buddhist, actually. So in doing that, we take the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha as like the three most important things in our lives. We say a triple gem, right? Gems are very valuable. So then we get the opportunity to, so we have faith in the Buddha and we can practice accordingly. So eventually this story, what happened, reached the king's palace. Then King Pasenadi of Kosala said to Queen Mallika, "This is what has been said by the recluse Gautama Mallika. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear. If that has been said by the Blessed One, sire, then it is so." So Queen Mallika agrees. Queen Mallika was a disciple of the Buddha. No matter what the recluse Gautama says, Mallika applauds it thus. If that has been said by the Blessed One, sire, then it is so. Just as a pupil applauds whatever his teacher says to him, saying, "So it is, teacher, so it is." So too, Mallika, no matter what the recluse Gautama says, you applaud it thus. If that has been said by the Blessed One, sire, then it is so. Be off, Mallika, away with you. So King Pasenadi gets upset at this, that Queen Mallika is just accepting whatever the Buddha says. So she was a faithful disciple of the Buddha. Then Queen Mallika addressed the Brahmin, Nali Janga, "Come, Brahmin, go to the Blessed One and pay homage in my name with your head at his feet, and ask whether he is free from illness and affliction, and is healthy, strong, and abiding in comfort, saying, 'Venerable Sir, Queen Mallika pays homage with her head at the Blessed One's feet, and ask whether the Blessed One is free from illness and affliction, and is healthy, strong, and abiding in comfort.' Then say this, 'Venerable Sir, have these words been uttered by the Blessed One? Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear.' So Queen Mallika is sending this Brahmin as a messenger to go and learn this from the Buddha directly. Learn well what the Blessed One replies and report it to me, for Tathagatas do not speak untruth. So the Buddhas do not speak falsely. So it's important to know exactly what the Buddha says. Is this just a rumor, or did the Buddha actually speak these words? "Yes, madam," he replied, and he went to the Blessed One and exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and amiable talk was finished, he sat down at one side and said, "Master Gautama, Queen Mallika pays homage with her head at Master Gautama's feet," and so on. And she says this, "Venerable Sir, have these words been spoken by the Blessed One? Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear." So suffering is born from those who are dear, arises from those who are dear. And the Buddha replies, "So it is, Brahmin, so it is. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear." Now in this sentence, can anyone tell me, so what is the Buddha really teaching here? Can you say in other words, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear? Can you maybe connect this with one of the Buddha's other teachings? What is the fundamental principle that the Buddha is teaching here?
Ante. So in other words, when we have attachment to like somebody that we love, then when something happens to them, we have suffering in our minds, we cry, we suffer, as opposed to somebody down the street that we don't know so well. If something happens to them, we don't have that same arising of feelings.
Yes, that's true. So the Buddha is teaching the noble truth of the origin of suffering here. right? So we say born is another a synonym for like arisen from, right? So the cause of suffering here is those who are dear. Do you understand that? So what the householder said is also true. Yes, Ray?
Wasn't there another sutta where a mother was with her hair wet and her baby had died, and he had asked to go to another house and he would bring back her child if she could find somewhere with that a household that hasn't gone through that also?
Yeah, that was the story of Kisa Gautami. So yeah, she went to the Buddha, and as I remember, she was holding the child, the corpse of the boy in her arms, and the Buddha told her to go to a house to get some mustard seeds from a house where no one had died. But when she went and tried to do this, to find those mustard seeds that had that special condition, she couldn't do it because in every house someone had died. So eventually she understood the nature that all people are subject to death, right? So here the Buddha, what's important in this discourse, the Buddha is speaking directly about the first noble truth and the second noble truth. So indirectly about the third noble truth and the fourth noble truth. But there's another discourse that I wanted to teach you that will also explain more details on this subject. So then the Buddha explains in detail, it can be understood from this Brahman how sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear. Once in this same Savatthi, in the city of Savatthi, there was a certain woman whose mother died. Owing to her mother's death, she went mad, lost her mind, and wandered from street to street and from crossroad to crossroad, saying, "Have you seen my mother? Have you seen my mother?" And it can also be understood from this how sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish, or suffering, are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear. Once in this same Savatthi, there was a certain woman whose father died, whose brother died, whose sister died, whose son died, whose daughter died, or whose husband died. Owing to her husband's death, she went mad, lost her mind, and wandered from street to street, from crossroad to crossroad, saying, "Have you seen my husband? Have you seen my husband?" So people, when they lose their relatives, some people can go mad when their relatives die. So, and then the same thing can happen to a man, right? And it can also be understood from this how sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear. Once in the same Savatthi, there was a certain man whose mother died, whose father died, brother died, sister died, son died, daughter died, or whose wife died. So this doesn't only happen to women, right? Owing to his wife's death, he went mad, lost his mind, and wandered from street to street and from crossroad to crossroad, saying, "Have you seen my wife? Have you seen my wife?" So these people suffered, right? Because their relatives or their spouse died. They suffered because of that. So it looks like, that's why the normal person might think, it looks like the suffering is caused because of the death of their relative. But that's not the reality, actually. And it can also be understood from this how sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear. Once in this same Savatthi, there was a certain woman who went to live with her relative's family. Her relatives wanted to divorce her from her husband and give her to another whom she did not want. So her family didn't like her husband, and they wanted to get them divorced. Then the woman said to her husband, Lord, these relatives of mine want to divorce me from you and give me to another whom I do not want. Then the man cut the woman in two and disemboweled himself, thinking, we shall be together in the afterlife. Can also be understood from this how sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear. So, because of his desire, right? Because of his attachment to his wife, because she was very dear to him, he couldn't bear losing her. So he had a wrong view, firstly, and he thought that if both of them die, then they can be together in the afterlife. So he kills his wife, he murders his wife, and commits suicide himself. Why? Because he's averse to separation from his wife who is dear to him. Then, delighting and rejoicing in the Blessed One's words, the Brahmin Nali Janga rose from his seat, went to Queen Mallika, and reported to her his entire conversation with the Blessed One. Then Queen Mallika went to King Pasenadi of Kosala and asked him, what do you think, sire? Is Princess Vajidi dear to you? This is the king's daughter, right? Yes, Mallika, Princess Vajidi is dear to me. What do you think, sire? If change and alteration took place in Princess Vajidi, change and alteration, we can get the meaning. So maybe she becomes extremely ill. Maybe she dies. So if such a thing happened to Princess Vajidi, would sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish arise in you? Change and alteration in Princess Vajidi would mean an alteration in my life. So see how the king responds, right? So something happens to his daughter, and his whole life is upset. His whole life is set into turmoil because something happened to his daughter. Nothing happened to him, actually. Right? Maybe his daughter contracts a severe illness, and his whole life is turned upside down. This is what happens to people, right? But actually nothing happened to him. It's an external thing that happened. But it upsets a person so much, right? It was with reference to this, sire, Queen Mallika is saying, that the Blessed One who knows and sees, the Arahant, fully enlightened, said, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear. So do you understand? If you can think about your own life. So if your daughter, some of you probably have daughters, if your daughter were to contract COVID-19, be hospitalized, be on the verge of death, or if she actually died, what would happen to you? Would you suffer because of that? So it's with reference to this that the Buddha says, all of this suffering arises because of those who are dear. What do you think, sire? Is the noble queen Vasabha dear to you? This was one of the king's other queens. Is General Vidudaba dear to you, his son, the prince? Am I dear to you? She's asking about herself, Queen Mallika. Are Kasi and Kosala dear to you? So is the country dear to you? Yes, Mallika. So all of these people and the country is dear to him, to King Pasenadi of Kosala. So we owe it to Kasi and Kosala that we use Kasi sandalwood and wear garlands, scents, and unguents. So He's explaining Kasi and Kosala, the countries of Kasi and Kosala, are dear to the king because he gets to use various sensual pleasures because of the country. So the king gains wealth from the country, right, through taxation, and he gets to use various sensual pleasures that the country produces. So what do you think, sire? If change and alteration took place in Kasi and Kosala, maybe there's a war or a famine, many people die, the economy collapses, and these things that are dear to him, the sensual pleasures, they disappear maybe. So if change and alteration took place in Kasi and Kosala, would sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair arise in you? Change and alteration in Kasi and Kosala would mean an alteration in my life. How could sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish not arise in me? So this happens to people, right? They can get very upset based on the political situation in the country, what's happening, because the country is dear to them. The country is dear to them. So when the country changes for the worse, they get upset. It was with reference to this, sire, that the Blessed One who knows and sees, the Arahant, fully enlightened, said, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and anguish are born from those who are dear, arise from those who are dear. It is wonderful, Mallika. It is marvelous how far the Blessed One penetrates with wisdom and sees with wisdom. Come, Mallika, give me the ablution water. Then King Pasenadi of Kosala rose from his seat, and arranging his upper robe on one shoulder, he extended his hands in reverential salutation toward the Blessed One, and uttered this exclamation 3 times. Homage to the Blessed One, accomplished and fully enlightened. Homage to the Blessed One, accomplished and fully enlightened. Homage to the Blessed One, accomplished and fully enlightened. So the king understood to some degree. He didn't gain a realization, but he understood to some degree what the Buddha is teaching. The noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of the origin of suffering. So think in your own lives, your loved ones, the people who are close to you, people who are dear to you, if they got seriously ill or died, how you would react. And then your reaction, as Arjuna mentioned, there's another discourse that includes the details that Arjuna mentioned. So you can compare your reaction in such a situation to your reaction if a stranger dies. Right, so I think maybe none of you probably have relatives in Brazil, maybe? Or relatives in Russia? So when many people are dying because of the pandemic in those countries, is it particularly upsetting to you? Maybe you can have compassion for those people, right? But do you suffer mentally because of that? No, right? Why? Because you don't have this particular desire or attachment to those people. So we can think one of your relatives is in a foreign country. Now, are you interested in anyone else in the country? Or that one person who's in the foreign country? The one relative, right? Or the spouse or whoever it might be. You're not very concerned about other people. So what is the difference between your interaction with the other people and that one person? The desire, right? That's how we can understand the noble truth of the origin of suffering. Now, there's another small discourse I wanted to teach you along the same subject. Are there any questions before we start that one? Any comments?
Bhante, I had a comment.
Yes.
Sometimes nothing needs to even happen to this person that is dear to us because we have the sense of ownership over them. If they do not meet our expectations, in whatever way it could be, it could even be something in sports, for example. We can get really upset because of that.
So we have a desire, right, for something to happen in the future. An expectation is a kind of desire. So when that expectation isn't fulfilled, when we don't get what we desire, then we suffer, right? But if we don't have that desire in the first place, then would we suffer so we don't have an expectation actually. So how can we suffer when the expectation doesn't meet our standards, right? So this is a deep point. Now, so to practice in this way, maybe some of you have read the Baddekaratta Sutta in Majjhima Nikaya, where the Buddha speaks about not reviving the past and not building one's hopes, one's expectations on the future, but to contemplate with insight on the present moment. So, as not easy to practice, but so for example, in the contemplation of the, thank you for the link. So in contemplation of the 5 aggregates affected by clinging, right? In contemplation of suffering, the noble truth of suffering, Buddha mentions past, present, and future. The future hasn't arrived yet, right? But we can be attached to that. It's the nature of our mind. Now, I didn't mention, so when we learn this discourse, we should understand very clearly what the Buddha is teaching here. So the Buddha also teaches, for example, the Mahamangala Sutta, the discourse on blessings, Nyatakanancha Sangaho. So giving assistance to one's relatives is a blessing. Mata Pitu Upattana, to attend to one's mother and father is a blessing. So it's important. So the way we interact with our relatives, now all those living at home, so when we interact with our relatives, our spouse, here this discourse is talking about desire and attachment, right? But that doesn't mean that we should just like ignore them or like push them away. That's not the meaning. So instead of desire and attachment, we can develop 4 other things instead. Loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. Right, so those are undefiled states of mind. Desire and attachment are defiled states of mind. But instead of that desire and attachment, to practice selfless loving kindness towards one's relatives, compassion toward them when they experience suffering, so they may be free from their suffering, to rejoice in their success and their happiness, and to remain equanimous when the 8 worldly conditions change in the world, right? So instead of defiled states of mind, instead of craving, we should try to abandon craving and develop these 4 things instead. Do you understand? We can take a great example. Have any of you learned the Gatikara Sutta on Gatikara the potter? So he was the chief lay supporter in the Buddha Kassapa's dispensation, before the Buddha Gautama. In the Buddha Kassapa's dispensation, he was the chief lay supporter. and he was a non-returner disciple. So he had no sensual desire. He had gotten rid of anger. But he lived at home because his parents were still alive and his parents were blind. So he lived at home caring for his parents, but he has no sensual desire toward his parents. Right? He has no attachment towards his parents, but he takes care of them as his duty as a son, and because it's a wholesome thing. It's a good thing to do. You understand? So that's a disciple he's gained realization. He's a non-returner, but he diligently cared for his parents.
Monday.
Yes.
I think of when we're talking about this, I think of my daughter, and I would lay down my life in a second for her because of my attachment and my love for her. When I think, and I've thought about this of what we've talked about, and I've thought of it. I think if, say, tomorrow she passed away, I would be more that I can understand my grief and what it is, and be able to understand that it's impermanent. But I still think I would have the grief. I just don't think I would have it as much as somebody who more doesn't understand about impermanence and stuff like that. But my attachment to that person, or to my daughter, or to my wife, or to my family, I think I would just be more prepared for the pain that's going to come.
Yeah, that's a good comment. So, like I said, 2 weeks ago, we learned the Nakulapitu Sutta about oneself. And I wanted to teach these discourses today because this is what's happening in the world. So many people are losing their relatives. Thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people are dying. So they're all someone's relatives. So the same thing can happen to us. So I wanted to teach you this discourse so you can prepare yourselves mentally. So it might happen to you. We can't say, right? Your spouse, your children, your parents. So the important thing to understand is that we're actually desiring, attached to something that is suffering, because it's impermanent. So all of our relationships, all of our loved ones, so one day we're going to be separated from all of them. Sabbehi me piyehi manapehi nana bhavu vinabhavoti. So the Buddha taught to often reflect, whether it's a man or a woman, a lay disciple or a monk, a nun, they should often reflect that I will be separated from everyone and everything that is dear to me. So often reflecting in this way, it's possible to reduce one's desire and attachment, because one sees the reality of impermanence, right? So all of these people, they were born, right? They have a limited lifespan, and they're going to die one day. Whether when they're young, middle-aged, or old. I had a friend in high school who contracted brain cancer when he was maybe 19 years old, and he died when he was about 20. After I think his first year of university, he died because of brain cancer. How many 20-year-olds get brain cancer? Very few. So it's possible to die when young, when middle-aged, when old. So not only us, but everyone. That's the nature. So to reduce our own suffering, to reduce our suffering in samsara, right? Because any desire and attachment we have not only leads to suffering in this life, but it's also a cause and condition for suffering in future lives, because craving leads to rebirth. Right? Do you understand that? So we should try and contemplate on the nature of this suffering. We should try and contemplate on the Four Noble Truths and understand them try to gain a realization of them, because that will lead to the cessation of suffering, right? So now, to follow along with this theme, I wanted to teach you another discourse that kind of maybe. So this discourse, Piyajatika Sutta, discussed like the nature of our problem, but the Buddha doesn't give exactly practical advice on how to proceed, what we should do. But in this sutta, this is called Visakha Sutta. It's the 8th discourse in the Book of Eights in the Udana. So if someone can send a link to that, maybe I think Daniil is trying to pull it up on the computer. Maybe you've heard this discourse. It's a very how to say, very striking discourse. Okay. Now, the scenario for this discourse is very similar to Piyajatika Sutta. Visakha's grandson dies. There's another case of a relative passing away. Thus have I heard, at one time the Blessed One was staying near Savatthi in the eastern park at Migada's mother's mansion. On that occasion, the dearly beloved grandchild of Visakha, Migada's mother, had died. Then Visakha, Migada's mother, with wet clothes and hair, approached the Blessed One in the middle of the day. So this is how people in the Buddha's time in India, they would mourn a person's death. They would wet their clothes and hair. So now people wear black, right? In Western countries, people wear black. Having prostrated herself, she sat down to one side, and the Lord said to her, the Blessed One said to her, "Where have you come from, Visakha, arriving here in the middle of the day with wet clothes and hair?" "Venerable Sir, my dearly beloved grandchild has died. That is why I have arrived here in the middle of the day with wet clothes and hair." Now we should remember Visakha, she's a stream enter, right? So she has realized the Dhamma to the extent of a stream enter. "Visakha, would you like to have as many children and grandchildren as there are people in Savatthi?" There's the Buddha's question. "I would, Venerable Sir, like to have as many children and grandchildren as there are people in Savatthi." So right away, she would like to have maybe hundreds of thousands, millions of children and grandchildren, all the people in the city. If they were all her children and grandchildren, that would be wonderful, she's thinking. But how many people, Visakha, die daily in Savatthi? Perhaps 10 people, Venerable Sir, die daily in Savatthi, or perhaps 9 people die, or 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, or 2 people die, or perhaps 1 person dies daily in Savatthi. Venerable Sir, Savatthi is never without people dying. People are always dying in Savatthi. People are always dying in Toronto, right? People are always dying in Winnipeg. So what do you think, Visakha? Would you ever be without wet clothes or wet hair? No, Venerable Sir. Enough with having so many children and grandchildren. So now she abandons that idea. She wanted to have so many children before. So she understood what the Buddha is trying to teach her, right? Visakha, those who have 100 dear ones have 100 sufferings. Those who have 90 dear ones have 90 sufferings. Those who have 80, 70, 60, 50 or 40 dear ones have 40 sufferings. Those who have 30, 20, 10, or 5 dear ones have 5 sufferings. Now, this is not just people, but also possessions too, right? Those who have 4, 3, or 2 dear ones have 2 sufferings. Those who have 1 dear one have 1 suffering, 1 source of suffering. Those who have no dear ones have no suffering. So what is the cause of suffering here?
Attachment, Bhante.
Yes, holding things dear, right? So without that, so Arahants still have family members, right? The Buddha still had family members, but he didn't regard them as dear, right? Because he understood the nature of impermanence, suffering. He understand that suffering arises because of desire and attachment. The Buddha realized this. So he didn't hold anything dear. So those who have no dear ones have no suffering. They are sorrowless, stainless, without despair, I say. Then, on realizing its significance, the Blessed One uttered on that occasion this inspired utterance. This is a very beautiful verse in Pali too. Maybe if some of you know Pali. Whatever sorrows or lamentations there are, ye kechisoka paridevitava, the various kinds of suffering in the world, it is because of something dear that these exist. Without something dear, these do not exist. Whatever sorrows or lamentations there are, the various kinds of suffering in the world, it is because of something dear that these exist. Without something dear, these do not exist. Tasmai te sukhino vitasoka. So they are happy and free from sorrow, who have nothing dear anywhere in the world. So, aspiring to be sorrowless and stainless, do not hold dear anything anywhere in the world. So they are happy and free from sorrow, who have nothing dear anywhere in the world. So a person who has nothing dear to them has no suffering. So aspiring to be sorrowless and stainless, do not hold dear anything anywhere in the world. This is the Four Noble Truths in these 2 verses, right? Do you understand what the Buddha is trying to teach you? So this is the way to practice, like I said. So not holding things dear doesn't mean that we become like apathetic or uninterested in our relatives, our spouses. But like I said, instead of attachment, instead of desire, we can practice the 4 Brahma Viharas: loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. So those states don't give rise to suffering. Right? Loving kindness is part of the Noble Eightfold Path. Compassion is part of the Noble Eightfold Path. Right? So to practice those, you can practice them as meditations, or simply just learn to cultivate those kind of thoughts. And in that way, then suffering, the cause for suffering, is not there. We remove our desire, our attachment, by not holding things dear. then that's the way to escape from suffering. And the path to do that is the Noble Eightfold Path. Right? Now, I didn't explain it, so and the sutta doesn't explain it in explicitly. But so things that are dear, we can think maybe first comes to mind people, right? Possessions, one's relatives, one's spouse, children, but then also one's house, right? One's car, money maybe. So those are also things that we can hold dear. But even deeper than that, maybe some of you remember in the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the sutta on the greater discourse on the establishments of mindfulness. So in that discourse, the Buddha, when he's teaching the second and the third noble truths about how craving arises and about how craving ceases, craving arises in relation to whatever is pleasing and agreeable in the world. Yang loke piyarupang satarupang ettesa tanha upajjamana upajjati. Whatever is pleasing and agreeable in the world, it is there that craving arises when it arises. Etta nivisamana nivisati. It is there that craving becomes established when it becomes established. Kinja loke piyarupang satarupang. What in the world is pleasing and agreeable? The eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind, forms, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, mental phenomena, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, mind consciousness. So there the Buddha explains very deeply the places where craving arises. So we can think in another way when we're thinking about, so maybe your children, your relatives. So there's a way you can think about them, a visible form you see, a sound you hear, a smell, a taste, a touch, right? The Buddha explains on a very deep level in that discourse. So now let me ask everyone, Buddha says, do not hold dear anything anywhere in the world. Now can we do this by an act of will? No, right? So how do we do this then? Practically?
We need to reflect on the danger, Bhante.
Very good, yes. That's the correct answer. So when we reflect on the danger of the things that are dear to us, by that way we can reduce our craving. We can reduce our desire and attachment. So reflecting that all of the people, all of the things that are dear to us, not just people and things, but the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, forms, sounds, smells, tastes, touch, mental phenomena, all impermanent. Because they're impermanent, they're sources of suffering. There's no permanent happiness we can gain from them. No secure happiness that we can gain from them. And they're subject to change. So normally do we contemplate in this way, or do we contemplate on the gratification? The pleasure and the joy, the happiness that these things bring to us. But that's a normal way of contemplating, right? That way of contemplating doesn't lead to the cessation of suffering. That leads to the increase of craving. So, like Ben said, to contemplate on the danger of things is the way to reduce our craving. And that would be included under the 4 foundations of mindfulness, to think in such a way. And also we can think of right thought in the Noble Eightfold Path, thoughts of renunciation, to think on impermanence in that way. Any questions or comments on what we discussed today? Yes, Prasad.
Yes, I just wanted to add something to that danger comment. And I think, we can't realize the danger, like exact subtleness of the danger, if we don't know the gravity due to the absence of what is causing the danger. I think the good sutta for this is Rahogata Sutta. And he explains, Tathagata explains the Anupubba Sankara Nirodha for that. So when you go to the one level above, so that means if you go to Nekkhamma Sutta from Kama Sutta, for example, if you go to first jhana, then you know the gravity of first jhana, and then you know the danger of karma. So then you go to second jhana, so you see the same thing. Then when you come down from first jhana to karma, or second jhana to the first jhana, then Tathagata says in Tapussa Sutta, he says that in a different sutta, he says, Sukhino Dukkhang Upajjati. So the suffering starts, suffering coming from happiness. So then you go to the next level. So like that, you go to till you go up to Nirodha Samapatti. Then you go to, then you concentrate on Amataya Dhatya, then you attain Nibbana. So that's how he explains Anupubba Sankara Nirodha and how to get out of this suffering slowly.
Yeah, so that's one way of contemplating, right? So even like the first jhana, you can contemplate on the danger of that. It's a very exalted state, right? It's exalted meditative state, but you can contemplate on its drawbacks. It's the cons, so to speak. Right? So maybe another way of contemplating would be, maybe some of you have read the Datthabha Sutta, where the Buddha speaks about feelings and the way we should contemplate about feelings. The Buddha said to contemplate the pleasant feeling as suffering. So how do you do that? Because it's impermanent, right? So it doesn't last. Pleasant feeling, whatever pleasant feeling we experience, very fleeting, very short time that it actually exists. And then unpleasant feeling, a painful feeling, to contemplate it like a dart, or like an arrow is shot into one. And a neutral feeling, to contemplate that as impermanent. With contemplating in such a way that leads to disenchantment with those feelings. So hopefully, I think by learning these discourses, I think these will help you face the situations that are transpiring in the world today, and hopefully help you to face them with wisdom and understanding. Because we don't know what will happen tomorrow, right? Ko janya maranang sube. Who knows, like, whether we won't die tomorrow, or one of our loved ones won't die tomorrow. So when that's the reality, to prepare ourselves mentally to gain wisdom, to develop wisdom before something like that happens, is extremely valuable for us, right? That's why we are practicing the Dhamma. Any other questions or comments?
Namo Buddhaya Bhante. Is it okay if I ask a question?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So actually, just a thought came up in my mind. Does the Buddha ever say that, because the thing is, like, actually other people are dear to us because we ourselves are dear to ourselves, right? So it's because we are dear to ourselves that other people are dear to us. Like, for example, we like our friends because we like ourselves, because they give us some sort of happiness, right? So is there, like, does the Buddha say that in order to remove attachment for others, we have to first remove the attachment to ourselves? Because the way I see it, it's like a
Well,
byproduct of
I don't think
self-attachment.
it's. Mm, I don't think it's a byproduct. So let me think about that. I think it's possible for a person to have very low self-esteem, but be attached to other people and desires of other people, desires of possessions, material possessions. I think such a scenario is possible. So even though they regard themselves very low, as very inferior, still they're caught up in desire and attachment. I don't think it's necessarily a byproduct, but if you want to look at it on a deeper level with insight, so in the Hemaka Sutta, the Buddha says, Ida ditta sutta mutta vinyatesu piyarupesu hemaka chandaraga vinodanam nibbana padamachyutam. So here hemaka, whatever is seen, heard, sensed, or cognized, that is, forms, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and mental phenomena, so all the external sense objects, whatever is pleasing, whatever has a pleasing nature, piyarupesu hemaka, chandaraga vinodanam, the removal of desire and attachment, the removal of desire and lust for all of those things is nibbana, is the deathless nibbana. So it's possible, and so instead of thinking in terms of like dear to ourselves, other people dear to us, you can think in that way also.
Okay,
So and then
Bhante.
whatever has a pleasing nature, the Buddha explains in the Mahasatipatthana Sutta. I explained a little bit. So the 6 internal senses, the 6 external senses, the 6 kinds of consciousness, 6 kinds of contact, the 6 kinds of feeling that arise at the senses. So if you do insight meditation on those things, that's thinking in a different way.
I see, I see. So basically to remove the attachment to the loved ones, it's basically you have to remove the attachment to the 6 senses.
Well, if you remove the attachment to the,
The 6 senses and the inputs, basically.
well,
Right.
that's nibbana if you do that
That's
entirely.
Nibbana, yeah. Yeah.
So in the Sabbha Sutta, maybe you've read that. So the Buddha explains the all, everything. The Buddha explains what is the all, what is everything. The eye and forms, the ear and sounds, the nose and smells, the tongue and tastes, the body and tangible objects, the mind and mental phenomena. That's everything. So if you remove desire and attachment for those things, then that includes everything else, right?
I see. And Bhante, just to confirm the name of the sutta, that's Hemaka, right?
Yeah, it's in the Sutta Nipata, in the
Sutta
last
Nipata.
chapter of the Sutta. Very short sutta, but like the Buddha explains very briefly how to attain Nibbana. Removing desire and attachment towards things that are pleasing. It's very simply stated, but to actually do that is a different matter. But
Right.
if we can gain
Right.
some understanding of that, some conceptual understanding of that, then we have the possibility to practice toward that, right?
I see. I see. And Bhante, just one more question. What's the difference between Loba, Chanda, and Tanha? Because to me, they all seem like they have some overlap, right? But there's a reason, I guess there's 3 different words for them.
I mean, I think there's synonyms discussing different aspects of the same thing, I think. Right, so we have synonyms in English too. So greed, desire, craving. So there's overlap in English too, right, with those words?
Yeah.
I think we can understand them as synonymous.
Okay. Okay, Bhante. Nam Buddhaya.
Any other questions or comments?
There was another Swaminathan. Now, in terms of Loba, now Tanha we have 3 3 kinds of Tanha: Kama Tanha, Bhava Tanha, Vibhava Tanha. But for the Loba, we usually tell it for Kama Tanha, right? Swaminathan, can you explain that? Loba, we call it for Kama. Because in one sutta, I remember in Kalama Sutta. Kalama Sutta, in Tathagata says, and I think someone asked, or he explains, what is Abhijja? And he says, Abhijja is another name for Loba. So, and that is only the simile I got in Sutta Pitaka for this, for the Loba. I was looking for that. That's why I found it. So, and then Abhijja, we know in many suttas, Abhijja was explained as Kamachanda. So from that sutta, I got the idea that Loba means another word for Kama, Chanda, or Abhijja. So we can explain furthermore. Swaminathan,
So, I mean, you're raising good questions. When we read the discourses, we find that sometimes the Buddha uses Pali words in different ways. So Chanda normally, as we translate desire, normally it has an unwholesome meaning. But there's a sutta when it's used when it's also used in discourses as something wholesome. Desire to develop wholesome states, desire to attain Nibbana. It's one of the 4 bases for spiritual power, the Iddhipada. Chanda, Samadhi, Padana, Sankhara, Samannagata, Iddhipada. So there's a desire to attain Nibbana, and based on that desire, developing Samadhi, and striving to develop wholesome states based on that Samadhi. So we should understand Pali words can be used in different situations in different ways. And sometimes, as Prasad mentioned, so Loba was there equated with avidya, ignorance. But normally the 2 are discussed separately, right?
Sorry,
In the
not
discourses.
there was not Abhijja, Abhijja.
Ah, abidja. Okay, yeah.
Abidja.
Yeah, abidja. So normally translated covetousness. So there the Buddha is using two synonyms, right? He's defining one word with another word. So we can get used to the terminology as we read over and over again. And I think it's important not to get not fixate on the words exactly, what word is being used, but we should understand the meaning. So phrasing is one thing and the meaning is another thing, right? Now it's possible to express the same meaning with different phrasing, right? So to use two different words, let's say, for example, Chanda and Tanha, desire and craving. So the meaning is the same for those, right? So in some places the Buddha, like I told you in Hemaka Sutta, Buddha doesn't use the word craving there. Buddha uses the word Chanda and Raga, desire and attachment, desire and lust. But simply, they're synonyms for craving, right? So we should try to catch the meaning, most importantly. Otherwise, it's also possible to get into arguments about the meaning of words, how words should be best translated. But I think if we get into that, we miss the point. Any other questions or comments?
Sarna Swaminathan, and I'm asking this question actually. This question came to me when I was learning Pali. The meaning of the word salayatanang. Salayatanang is a singular word. Salayatanang. Now, when he explains, Tathagata uses this special word salayatana, mostly in when he explains Paticcasamuppada. So, but it is in translations, all the translations come as six senses, six sensory bases, like it explains. But this is a singular word. It's not a plural. So, how do you how do you get this? The translations. And when he asks, Katamang Salayatana, so what are the Salayatana? When he explains Salayatana, Chakkayatana, Sotayatana, like that. So he asked the question also in a singular way. In singular, it's not like Katamani Salayatanani. It's not like that he's asking. He's asked Katamang Salayatana. So, and like Pasayatanang, Salayatanang, so like that Indriyang. So it's like but all the suttas, all the Pitakas translate as a plural. So what do you think about this, Swaminathan?
I think maybe there can be some cases when there's a deeper meaning in contemplating in terms of a singular or plural, but there I think it's simply just Pali grammar compared to English grammar. So in the Pali, when you have the compound, sal meaning six, ayatana translated as bases, so it just becomes a compound word in Pali, and then it's treated as a singular. So I don't think there's a deeper meaning behind the grammar there. There's another case when there's a word tinakatasaka palasam, which means the grass, the sticks, the branches of trees, and the foliage, the leaves. So in Pali, it's all those words are put together as a compound and it's treated as a singular. But I don't think there's a deeper meaning to that. It's just all those things are grouped as a compound word. In some cases, there could be a deeper meaning, like I said, but I don't think in that case there would be. Or Or in the example I gave about the grass and sticks and so forth. So it's just the grammar changing in translation. So in English, it has to become a plural. And so if you know Pali, there's like another example you could get, the Sati Sambojjhanga, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. But in Pali, it's not really enlightenment factor of mindfulness. Mindfulness is the enlightenment factor. Mindfulness itself is the enlightenment factor. But in English, we have to translate with a preposition there. Otherwise, if you say mindfulness enlightenment factor, it's a bit clunky. So in translation, sometimes we have to put in things that aren't exactly there in the Pali, but I don't think it changes the meaning in such a way that it distorts things. But if you understand the Pali, then you could see those grammatical differences, and you can wonder whether it's significant or not. In your question, I think in that compound, I don't think there's a significance in it being a singular. So I hope today's discourses were helpful for everyone. I hope they will lead to all of you developing wisdom in the future and ability to face the difficult times that are present in the world today, and the difficult situations that everyone is experiencing. So the way to face them is through the Buddha's teachings, right? Through wisdom. So by developing wisdom fully, there's no suffering, no matter what situations we come across. So the suffering comes from our own minds, the defilements in our own minds. So if we can learn about those and step by step remove them, step by step develop wise consideration, then that's the way to solve all of our problems, really, not external means. So with that, I think we can end for today. Let's end with the sharing of the merit. So any merit we acquired today by learning the Buddha's teachings, by discussing the Buddha's teachings, by asking insightful questions and discussing answers to them. May all of this merit, when we shared with the Devas and Brahmas of the world, may they rejoice in this merit, have long life and happiness, and realize the Four Noble Truths in this Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May we also share any merit we acquired today with our teacher, the founder of Mahamina Buddhist Monastery, Pinwa Lokuswami Nanti. May Lokuswami Nanti rejoice in this merit. May he have good health and long life, and realize the Four Noble Truths in this Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May we also share any merit we acquired today with all of the monks and nuns of Mahamina Buddhist Monastery, all of the monks and nuns around the world who are practicing the Buddha's teaching, as well as all of the laymen and laywomen who are practicing the Buddha's teaching and supporting the Buddha's dispensation with the four material requisites. May all of them have good health, long life, and realize the Four Noble Truths in this Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May this merit also be for all of us, so that we can develop in good qualities, be able to practice the Buddha's teachings as he taught it, so that we too can realize the Four Noble Truths in this Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And finally, let us share all of the merit we acquired today with all of the sick people around the world who are suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic. May they all reach a speedy recovery and attain good health. May they too realize the Four Noble Truths in this Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Kayena vacha chittena pamadena maya katam acchayam kamami bhanti bhuri panya tathagata Kayena vacha chittena pamadena maya katam Achayam kamame dhamma sanditthika kanika Kayena vacha chittena pamadena maya katam Achayam kamame sangha punya kitang anuttara Sadhu, sadhu.